Jeffrey Carson, my former U.S. Senate campaign manager. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing fantastic, man. It is so nice to be on this show with you. I think this is our first time, isn't it?
Yes, it is, Jeff. I've tried to get you on before, but I think when I did, you were in Argentina the last time I reached out. But hey, thanks so much for joining us here, Jeff. I'm excited to have you get your take. I know you're really excited to see what Javier Milei is doing in Argentina to make it great again. Give us your take, because you were there before Milei. So tell us a little bit about what the country was like before Milei took over, and then we'll analyze his results.
Well, I'll tell you, it's funny. It's funny we are talking about this because, for quick context, when did I call? I must have called you about him maybe like 3 months ago. I called kind of out of the blue. I was like, hey, let's talk about this. Let's talk about Argentina. I've been so excited about him and about what, hopefully, right, fingers crossed, he's doing for that country and all the economic opportunities that will come from it. But, yes, to answer your question, I was there, I turned 40 a couple of years ago. And as I was getting closer and closer to that birthday, I was like, man, I got to take some time off. I got to go do my thing, right? I'm a vagabond at heart. So I was like, all right, where do I want to go? I'm going to go backpack. I think I want to go to South America. I think I want to go to Argentina. Let's come up with some reasons why. And the World Cup was upcoming. This is, I'm not the biggest soccer fan in the world, but when it comes to the World Cup, man, I'll go nuts, right? And so the World Cup was going to be in the Middle East somewhere, I think in like Qatar. And I was like, well, I'm not going to Qatar. So Argentina, why not Argentina? They haven't won it in a long time. It's Messi's last one, probably, right? And so where would a cooler place be than to be in Argentina to experience the World Cup? So short story, I went to Argentina for 2 months as a part of a backpacking trip around South America. And I got to experience what it was like in Argentina. And I know you want to get to the economic stuff. And of course, that's important, but it's just really important for, I think, your viewers to understand, even before Milei took over, Argentina, it's just an incredible country. It was rich country, not rich economically, very poor economically, but rich history, rich culture, really friendly people, right? I mean, some of the most beautiful scenes I have ever seen in terms of the nature, way down south in Patagonia. I mean, just really beautiful. And I remember thinking down there, man, what would this country be like if it actually had a even remotely somewhat competent and not corrupt government, right? It's so crazy to see these people hustle and strive and just grind for every dollar, for every peso, and just see truly this economy is in shambles, and you can see it everywhere. And yet the people are still happy. They're still friendly. They're still they understood English pretty well, right? My Spanish is not so hot. So, they were willing to help me. I met a ton of friendly people down there, a ton of people who were willing to help me and answer questions and show me around. And it was an amazing experience, despite the fact that you could tell in a number of ways that I'm sure we'll get to, that this government sucks ass, in short. And I honestly remember thinking about at the time, it would just be amazing if they didn't have this shitty government. And then fast forward, 18 months, and it's holy shit, right? Milei, this is the dream, right? The libertarian gets elected, what's going to happen? So,
Jeffrey, talk to us.
Yeah, let me stop there. But
yeah, so let's get to the economic question. What was it like? Trying to make transactions there, operate your digital nomad, right? You've got dollars, you need pesos. How do you buy things? How do you sell things? How does inflation impacting you? Talk to us a little bit about those machinations, just so then we could talk about what Milei has changed.
Yeah, this is fun, man. All right, so first, as a tourist, right, as someone coming in, from the outside, before I even went, you kind of Google how do things work in Argentina, and it was a very unique place in a lot of ways. One way, it was very unique because there were two exchange rates back then. There were two different exchange rates. There was what they called the blue dollar rate, which was the real exchange rate, right? That's the market exchange rate. And when I arrived in, I think, late November of 2022, right? The actual exchange rate was 300 pesos to $1, right? But as I said, there's two. So there was a bullshit exchange rate as well, the official exchange rate, right? And so, you fly into the international airport, you go to the currency exchange, you don't get the real exchange rate. You get the government mandated one, which is about half, right? So your dollars don't buy 300 pesos to $1. At the government official one, you get about 150 to 1, right? So imagine you're a tourist, you go down there. If you don't know any better, like my parents would have no clue. They wouldn't know any better. They would just go to the bank, to the ATM. They would go to the official currency exchange, and they would get housed by 50% in terms of buying power. The same thing applied for the most part if you tried to use a credit card down there. Now, when I arrived, they were starting to kind of, I guess I could say, liberalize that a little bit. There were, I think Visa, some credit cards with like on the Visa platform were starting to give you closer to the blue dollar rate. But the short story is you really had to do research and talk to locals and figure out, how does this work? Where do I go and get dollars at the blue exchange rate, as opposed to get housed by the government imposed exchange rate?
So you would go, if you wanted to exchange your currency, you did not go to where we would normally go. Stephanie and I went to Japan last year. We were in the airport. We went to the monetary exchange there. We got yen. We got a decent rate. The currency exchange rate there, very favorable to the dollar. If you did something like that in Argentina, if you went to the Argentine bank that's there in their airport in Buenos Aires, you're going to get hosed. So you're better off going down the street in Buenos Aires and finding a guy standing outside the bank like a ticket scalper kind of a situation, right?
Yes, although, and that's initially what I thought it was like. Like you literally had to go, like the first couple of times I exchanged, dollars for pesos. Of course, I at least knew better not to go to the bank, but I would go like downtown Buenos Aires and ask around. Like you ask like the hostel, or you ask the hotel people, like, where is the guy, right? And then you got to go find the guy. You got to go find like a little, it's like a newspaper stand.
It's like,
right? And you like sneak in and you're like, what's going on here? And you like walk up to the newspaper stand and you're like, pesos, dollars? Yeah, okay, let's do this. And then they let you in this little back room in the back of the newspaper stand. You got to lock the door behind you. It's like, you're in this little tight area. And the guy's like, what's up? And you're like, yo, can you look it up? And he's like, yeah, I'll give you $2.90. And I'm like, but I've got $100 bills, which, by the way, $100 bills got you a higher exchange rate, right, than if you had like 20s. Like clean, crisp new hundreds got you a slightly higher exchange rate. So he'd be like, you got hundreds? Sí, senor, por supuesto, right? Of course I got hundreds, right? And then, you give him $100 and you get like, 290,000 pesos back, right? By the way, by the time I left, I remember, 29,000 pesos. My math was slightly off on that one. But by the time I left, like 4 months later, by the time I flew home, when I arrived, the real rate was 300 to 1. By the time I flew home, like 4 or 5 months later, the rate was 500 to 1, ballpark. That's about a 60% inflation rate in 4 months, 4.5 months. And it's wild, right? Now, listen, the last thing I'll say here is once I kind of learned a little bit more about how things work, I realized that you could actually go to Western Unions down there. Western Union is huge down there because the Western Union, it depends on which one you go to. A lot of them would not do this, but if you found the right one, they would give you the blue dollar rate as well. It was just kind of touch and go. You had to, again, still talk to locals and figure out which stores would hook you up and which stores would like just not give you money, right? They'd be like, no, we're not doing that. Sorry.
A lot of people would probably balk at doing something like that. It's especially a lot of foreign tourists and Americans. They are concerned about getting involved in shady business practices. It's funny because it reminds me a little bit of when I used to live in New York. I would go to Chinatown, and they would have a storefront set up, and then you would say, "Where's the real goods?" And they would actually have this sliding door that you would go down into like this scary little basement and stuff or whatever. Or like they would have like a hidden door in the apartment complex and you would like go through to the other side. And that's where they had all the real purses or things like that they would sell that they couldn't do because they were like, the knockoffs or whatever. I just wanted to go and see it. I wasn't buying Gucci purses or anything, but the point is that like most people, like our friend JD Berenson over in the chat right now, he says he's headed to Argentina next year. He says it sounds shady as F. It is shady as F, but that's what the point is. Javier Milei is trying to bring this out of the darkness.
And good news for your friend in the chat, right? So if we're able to in a little bit, I'd love to go back. I just gave you the viewpoint from the tourists. I want to give you the viewpoint from the local as well. I think that's probably even more important maybe for your viewers, right? Because these are the people who are now experiencing the Milei thing. If we can go back to that, I'd love to. But just to talk to your boy in the chat, this is the good news. And this is reason number 4,562 why I distrust the media, because they're misreporting this fact. But the good news is there are no longer two exchange rates. That was one of the things Milei did when he first got elected, is he said, we don't need two rates. We don't need a bullshit rate that is fake and not oriented towards the market, and a real rate. So he got rid of the fake rate, right? And he simplified everything. He said, no, we're just going to have the actual rate, because the rate is the rate, guys. We can't pretend. We can't pull shit out of our ass. Can I curse on here, by the way?
Try and keep it to a minimum. I don't. Okay. It's legal. We're not on the air on radio, but I try and make it family friendly. Like Sarah Sanchez is in the car this morning with her little kids, so let's just try it. PG-13.
I'm sorry, Sarah Sanchez. I will keep a lid on that.
Thank you.
So forgive me. So all Milei did was get rid of the baloney rate and allow for the actual market rate to exist. And you know how the media covered that? Almost exclusively, right? Oh, libertarian takes office and immediately, right, the currency exchange,
the economy.
Yeah, wrecking the economy. The currency exchange is cut by 50% in terms of the dollars being able to be purchased. The implication, of course, being the exchange rate, fell like a rock because of Milei's election, which is just totally, absolutely wrong, right? What are you gonna do?
Okay, well, let's talk about what's really happened, because in this article that was trending #1 on Fox News over the weekend says Argentina's Milei shuts up critics, probably not true, with miracle turnaround of economy, definitely true, and his strong security policies. So Milei won the presidency last November, started to take over officially really in January, and he has taken the monthly inflation rate from 25% down to 8.8%. The budget surplus, $589 million, record surplus, and he has also begun some small level of deregulation, which he is allowed to do as president. However, in order for there to be a massive deregulatory agenda and for dollarization to go through, he's going to need a bigger turnout in next year's elections. That's the political thing. But on the economic question here, Jeff, some of the people who are critics of Milei here in the United States, domestic critics of Milei from the libertarians, is they're saying that he's really not doing what he promised he would do with dollarization. And they're saying that this idea to go and get a bailout from the IMF, the billions of dollars that he needs to get his country up and running, and to take out loans from the IMF is a big problem. How would you respond to some of those critics of his dollarization, wait and see program, and then the question of taking the money from the IMF? Your thoughts?
Quick on the IMF, obviously that's what the foreign regime, and the foreign regime, if you will, basically this is like almost 100 years of the Peronistas, right? Which is like, it's like the worst of crony capitalism / socialism / corruption, right? For just decades and decades and decades, not quite 100 years, but I mean, just many decades of successively worse and worse governments with a few coups thrown in there for good measure, right? That went to like military dictatorships, but it just, I mean, awful, the worst kind of government you could have. And all Milei has done when he's come in, and by the way, that former regime, or you could say successive regimes, they took IMF loans like there was no tomorrow, right? And of course, all those loans come with strings, and those strings and all the things that Argentina did in terms of the ridiculous, debt and the money printing and everything, obviously had tremendously negative effects on the people. In fact, great segue into what I wanted to talk very quickly. If I could go back to, I told you what it was like for me as a tourist, but for the locals I met. In fact, I actually, for a couple of weeks, started dating a local Argentinian in Buenos Aires. And she was telling me about, it was great. It was a great country. Again, highly recommend it. But I remember her telling me how locals in Buenos Aires, she was like a white collar worker, right? Like, she relatively affluent, right? But the government imposed a dollar limit, a US dollar limit on what she could spend each month. And they monitored it. So she could only spend or save $200 US currency each month. Because you can imagine if your inflation rate is 100% year over year, all you're trying to do when you make pesos, right? That's what you make for your job. So you're immediately trying to get out of pesos as soon as you can, right? You're not going to sit there and watch yourself lose 100% year over year, right? Or more. So all the Argentinians, are trying to do all the time, especially previously, was immediately when they get their peso paycheck, exchange it for dollars. But the government knew that, and because the government and the economy was so crappy, the government had to force people to keep pesos. Basically, they forced people to lose value on their own hard-earned pesos. So they mandated a $200 cap. That applied to things like Netflix. So she had Netflix, which was, I think she said it was $11 US a month, which applied against her monthly $200 cap and took it down to, what is it, 189. It's mind-boggling bonkers. So all they would do is do everything they could under the table to get US hard-earned cash currency, put it on the mattress, and that was the economy. I mean, that's it. And if they wanted to go buy a car or buy a big ticket item, no one was doing it with a credit card because of the taxes and the fees. Not tourists, not locals. So people would literally take, like drug dealers, they would take backpacks of currency to go buy a flat screen TV, because that's the only way you could do it. I mean, because the highest peso denomination when I was there was 1,000 pesos. And that was equivalent to about $2, $2.50 when I was there.
It's kind of that was the highest. It's kind of amazing, like the way that they impose these kinds of price controls and monetary controls, and how the United States has done similar things here to try and control inflation, stagflation. For example, a lot of people don't know that in American history that for a period it was actually illegal to own gold in this country because of what
thank you, FDR.
FDR issued an executive order that confiscated gold from American citizens, and it wasn't until Richard Nixon closed the gold window, I think in 1971, that it was finally legal for Americans to own gold again. But for like a 40-year period or so, it was illegal for American citizens to own gold. And these are the kinds of price controls and wage controls and things, the monetary controls that tyrannical authoritarian governments do to try and control the economy, rather than to allow free floating of currencies and free exchange of precious metals and commodities that might actually bring prosperity to our nation. Because, of course, dictators and tyrants never want to let go of control, and money, controlling the money supply, is like it's like controlling the tap. It's like putting a kink in the hose at the very right where it comes out at the very top of the economy, and that's why I love seeing things like the news that Thomas Massie is bringing up his bill to end the Fed. I don't think it's going to happen, but we could spend all day talking about these economic questions, and I'd like to move on, Jeff, to the foreign policy questions. But very briefly, if you don't mind, let me just reset because it's a live show. So frequently, a lot of people will jump into the middle of a conversation and they might wonder who we are. I'm Austin Petersen, the host of the Wake Up America show. Thank you for joining us. Please do click that like button. If it's your first time watching the Wake Up America show and you enjoy this content, the show schedule is Mondays through Fridays, 7 to 9 a.m. Central Time. It's a live show, so click that follow button before you leave today and come back and join us for the regular schedule. We'd love to have you be a regular guest. Now, speaking of Jeffrey Carson, he's a digital nomad joining us to talk about what he saw and experienced while he was in Argentina and his thoughts about the new libertarian president, Javier Milei. I've been very interested in how Javier Milei has been conducting diplomacy. Now, the breaking news today is that he's in a little bit of hot water because I think he traveled to Spain and he said that the wife of the Spanish prime minister was corrupt, and now they're like talking about pulling the embassy from Buenos Aires of Spain. So it's kind of, like he's kind of he's a lot like us libertarians, Jeff. He's kind of an asshole, which can get you in trouble diplomatically. However, his foreign policy is not like American libertarians. Now, I might be a little bit more hawkish than you are, Jeff, but you did serve as a captain in the U.S. Army, so let's give it up to you that. Thank you for your service, sir. However, Javier Milei has not adopted the type of foreign policy that we see many American libertarians have. He's pro-West, he's pro-U.S., he's very much keen to join NATO. He wants to be a part of the NATO alliance. He's telling BRICS to flex. He's telling them to screw off. He doesn't want to have anything to do with Russia, India, China. He doesn't want to have anything to do with the quote-unquote bad guys of the world. He wants to build an alliance with the West, with the United States. And certainly that would be the kind of thing that would be good for the U.S., right? Dollarization would be good for the United States. But many of Javier Milei's critics here in the United States, his Yankee critics, say that this is that his foreign policy does not align with the kinds of principles that you might see from Mises type people here in the U.S. What are your thoughts on Javier Milei saying things like he wants to join with NATO and sending helicopters to Ukraine, for example?
First, what a great question, man. This is a really interesting topic to me. Being a libertarian and a former military guy, as you said, and you and I have, having had so many debates historically, right, about the foreign policy question. I'll tell you, over the years, since you and I really last dove into this stuff, I think I have moderated a bit, or maybe come around a little bit more towards your end of the spectrum. Certainly I would never consider myself like a pro-war guy or like a neocon, like obviously not, right? But maybe a realist. I obviously, so short story is I'm a fan. I'm a fan of what he's doing. I don't know if he has a choice as well. I mean, politically, given the spot he is in, I don't think he would have wanted to, but had he sort of said, screw the West, right, I'm going to go with the BRICS, I don't think he survives very long, right? So, but nevertheless, that's just politics. I mean, and I don't think he's doing this for politics. I think he actually believes in at least the ideas of the West, right? The ideas in freedom, the ideas of America, for example, being the shining city on the hill, right? Like this is stuff we have forgotten, I think. I'm certainly not a Mises guy. I actually, I can, for example, on Ukraine, for example, this is something I haven't really told a lot of people, but when that first broke out, in fact, I've told very few people. So breaking news, not really, because nobody cares. But when that first happened, within a couple of weeks of the Russians invading, I actually talked to some of my old military contacts and sent in all of my army stuff, like to the Ukrainian consulate in DC, the embassy. I think it's a consulate. It like basically volunteering to go over there, like, as just a veteran, to like help, whatever that meant. But sure, nothing ever came from that. I never heard back from them. And so nothing ever came. I'm not like sad about that. Like in hindsight, probably that would have been stupid, to go over to Ukraine myself. But the point is like, to me, there's no clear like bad guys, good guys, right? Like, and one could argue all day long about, well, the government in Ukraine is like, it's somewhat corrupt, like all governments. Great. I'm not really here to speak to that. I'm just like the Ukrainian people. Interestingly enough, I was actually in Ukraine in late 2021. So we were talking about me being just in Argentina. A year or two prior, I was actually in Ukraine, in Lviv, in the western part of the country, randomly there for, I couldn't even tell you why, but I was there and I got to experience what partying with Ukrainians is like. Ukrainians is like.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know why you were there. Some of the most beautiful women in the world, Jeffrey. Come on.
It was a really good trip. Actually, the short story is my old German nanny, Inga, bless her soul now, she's passed away. She was kind of like nearing the end. And so I went over to Germany to like see her one last time. And I was like in Germany and I was like, where do I go? Because like, I want to go somewhere I've never been. I was like, oh, well, I go to Ukraine. The crazy thing is like 5 months later is when the Russians invaded. So I just remember this. I remember like hanging out with Ukrainians and them like joking around about the Russians and joking around about like, oh yeah, they're going to invade, but like, we don't really give a shit. We're like, we don't care. We got to live our lives. And then the Russians actually did it. And to me, like, obviously there's bad guys, there's good guys. There's a country that's trying to defend itself from being taken over by an aggressor. Can we have a debate about how much aid we should provide? Obviously, I'm not supportive of like US troops being on the ground. Obviously, I think we have to be, we have to look back and wonder whether or not our NATO policies and the Eastern expansion had something to do with Putin's response here. Like, I think we have to look in a mirror and I think we have to learn from the past and apply those lessons going forward like you would in any field. So maybe that makes me a realist. And I think
that's where I'm at too, Jeffrey. But because specifically Javier Milei, he seems to think that there are good guys and bad guys in this conflict. He seems to think that the West are the good guys. He seems to admire the United States, want to build a stronger relationship with the West. He would like to apply for Argentina to be in NATO. He's signaling that he wants to be part of the Western Hemisphere's common market, and he wants to build trade relations with nations that are hostile powers to the United States. In sending aid and military helicopters, by the way, they got those military helicopters from Russia to Ukraine. He's sending those to Ukraine. He is signaling very clearly which side he is on. He's taking. And it might be that it's a realist position. It might be that he's like where I'm at and, where you seem to be moving towards in regards to we have to deal with the reality of the world as it is, and we're not going to live in an anarcho-capitalist utopia anytime soon when it comes to the foreign policy question. But, if that's in his best interests, it might be for economic reasons, but it might also be for national security reasons too, because you probably have heard the story about the incursions of Chinese fishing boats into Argentine waters, have you not?
I haven't actually heard about that, no.
Okay, well, we don't have to get into it too deeply, but the Javier Milei is looking to acquire some F-16 fighter jets in order to help police the borders of Argentina from illegal fishing that is occurring from Chinese boats that go into their waters, and they can't defend their own territorial integrity, which puts a lot of questions in regards to, what would a libertarian military really look like? What would it be like? Maybe Javier Milei is getting ready to build that, and that's certainly a question that we have. But another thing that has really triggered the international scene, and certainly a lot of people here in the United States have turned their backs on Javier Milei, people who are of our ideological ilk to a large extent, people who accept Austrian economics, people who lionize Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek. They despise Javier Milei because he has also picked a side in the conflict between Israel and Gaza. The question of the conflict between Israel and Gaza is not one of maybe some guys are good on one side and a little bit bad on that side, and then on this one. He has come out openly and declared his support for the nation of Israel and defending themselves against the kind of terrorist attacks that Hamas engaged in on October 7th. So obviously a much more touchy subject, not one that we can kind of dwell in shades of gray or nuance. We're talking about the hot conflict happening right now between Israel and Gaza. He has staked a claim on one side. Your take on that?
Good for him, right? And of course, like, there's always nuance, right? And you're never going to see that in the headline. You're never going to see that in the talking heads arguing back and forth, right? Because they're trying to get clicks and say wild stuff. But yeah, good. I mean, again, I think that there are good guys and bad guys in this one, right? Now, if somebody wants to take a step back and look at the last 70 years of policy here, right? And look at the history of it, and, the Israelis and the Palestinians and the different potential peace accords. But on the other hand, the different intifadas, right? And the invasions and almost annihilations of the Israeli and the Jewish people. I mean, the history goes both ways for sure. Like, there's no doubt about it. And I have had this conversation more times than I can count. At the end of the day, like, prior to October 7th, this question of like, well, what do you do? I don't know. I'm not Israeli. I'm not Jewish, right? I'm not Palestinian. I have spent time over there. I've spent time in the West Bank. Like, the short answer is like, I don't know. There's a lot of different things at play, in particular resources, in particular water underneath the ground, right? But that's historic. That's looking back. That's historic. That's prior to October 7th. That's prior to Hamas crossing the border and murdering and raping and pillaging through, the country of Israel, murdering upwards of 1,500 people, capturing 250 hostages, some of those American citizens, by the way, and then going back to Gaza and hiding behind those hostages and hiding behind innocent Palestinians.
I'm with you, Jeffrey. I'm with you 100%. Javier Milei absolutely agrees as well, but I have become something of a pariah in the libertarian movement.
This is wild to me. What are they saying? Forgive me. What are they advocating for?
You're not aware of the rampant anti-Semitism, the scourge of hate towards Jews and Israel that has occurred here since October 7th. You haven't paid attention to any of this.
I'm aware of it. Forgive me. I haven't paid so close attention to libertarian circles of late. So maybe you have to come in on this.
For me.
I have obviously seen a tremendous amount of rise of anti-Semitism on the left, right? Everyone has seen that on the college campuses, the Ivy League campuses, right? The pro-Hamas rallies. I have seen that. I've paid attention to that. That has irked me in my soul. And, maybe not shocking, but like, God, at least surprising, at least that they are vocal about it. I have not been paying attention to the libertarians.
Well, I think that probably speaks to the diminished influence that they have there, and why in desperation they reached out to have Donald Trump to speak at their convention. coming up over Memorial Day to do absolutely anything that they can to have a stab at relevance. If people remember, in 2016, you were leading my presidential campaign at the time when the Libertarian Party was at its zenith and reached at least 3%, a little bit more for their national vote total. And now they're looking at potentially coming in fourth place for the first time since 1992 when Ross Perot took third place with 18% in the presidential election of what was that year? God, what did I just say? It was Ross Perot, 1992.
92.
So Donald Trump speaks at the Libertarian Party convention where they're nominating their own presidential candidate who no one will know, and probably many of them are going to end up voting for Trump, and many of them, the other people, are going to vote for Biden. I'll ask you who you're going to vote for, Jeff, but not today because we got to run. Is there anything else that you want to share on our show or with our listeners before we let you go today?
I love this topic. I'm a big fan of Milei. I encourage people to consider traveling down there to Argentina. It's a beautiful country, beautiful scenery, and amazing people. Like, big fan of Argentina. And I think the sky is the limit for those folks with Milei at the helm. So thanks for having me on, Austin.
Yep. Thanks, Jeffrey. Hopefully the next time that you and I go to Argentina, it'll be together. We can have a lot of fun. But I'm married now, so you get to go off and do all the fun bachelor stuff.
LFG.
All right. Have a good one, Jeffrey. Have a great day. Thanks so much for your time today.